United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Emergency management's first on the agenda.
All right, thank you for having me this morning. So wanted to provide an update on where we're at with emergency management going into 2023. So starting May 1st, there's been a reassignment within the sheriff's office. So Nick Opsel, who's been hired full-time, he'll be taking over the role of emergency management. And that'll begin roughly May 1st. I'm going to continue to serve on some of the boards that I sit on, including the Regional Advisory Committee, which is a radio and armor board. So I'll continue working on that. So let's start with where we're at with the County Emergency Operations Plan. So right now, we're slated for 2023 for county board review. So the region itself has kind of been delayed just over the past couple of years. So I'm still finishing up with the HSEM review, which includes having the emergency operations plan looked over, reviewed, and by my RPC. Her name's Heather Winkleblack. She works for the state. So within the next few months, that should be complete, my RPC review. And then the plan is to have the emergency operations plan in front of the board by the fall of this year for review and hopeful adoption.
So maybe back up just a little bit of context. I'm not sure that everybody understands that the emergency management planning cycle is a 4-year cycle.
Correct, yes.
And so we're basically coming up to the end of one cycle and the start of another cycle in the course of 2023.
That's exactly right. So,
Okay.
we're at the end of one cycle, but we've been delayed 1 year, so we're trying to expedite to get back on schedule for the sheet that you have in front of you for 23 through 26.
And I have a question on how did our county get picked to be with the counties it's in?
So the northwestern Minnesota, it's a part of Region 3, so the state is broken up into different regions, and it's based on geography. All right, so moving forward, the other items that I put forth in front of you, I have the 2023 state and federal disaster indicator values. So these change slightly from year to year, and it's just to give kind of an overview or an idea of the ballpark that we're in essentially when it comes to natural disasters. So to be eligible for state assistance for any one given incident, the damage value would need to be over $47,383.68. That would be for state assistance. And then similarly for federal assistance, Hubbard would need to have over $94,767.36 in any one given incident to be eligible for federal reimbursement dollars. So that's just kind of an overview, and then the other sheet, this third sheet here, is the category sheet. So this is the type of work that would qualify for the public assistance program. These are just some examples, just kind of this more so a review for everyone to see, what needs to qualify to be eligible for this public assistance reimbursement program through state HSEM and then inevitably FEMA. And then finally, another project that's going on in 2023, it'll actually kind of carry over slightly into 2024, is our hazard mitigation plan review. So this again is kind of on a 5-year cycle. We're coming to the end of our old plan. It needs to be reviewed, updated, and then readopted. And I guess this plan needs to be in place so the county can be eligible with the federal government for FEMA reimbursement should anything come to that. And we've already entered into an agreement with University of Minnesota Duluth to assist with that planning process, and that'll take place throughout 2023. So the overview of the plan consists of having different township members, different county government members, participating in planning meetings throughout the summer. And then the University of Minnesota Duluth, they assist with kind of compiling all the data, bringing it into one plan, which is reviewed by the Emergency Management Office, and then eventually the county board.
So Dave, you're the representative for us, right? For the emergency?
Yes.
Okay.
So the question that brought this forward and why I reached out and asked you to be here today, Scott, was relative to the commissioner assignments on the emergency planning committee. What is the role of that committee in this development process, and what do you anticipate the schedule would be over the next couple of years?
With the hazard mitigation plan specifically, or? So,
Or just generally related to Hubbard County emergency management? Specifically to the hazard mitigation plan, yeah.
so with the hazard mitigation plan, you know, it can pretty much be anybody that's willing to participate. So it is a 25% match program. Historically, you know, people from Public Works have participated, different township supervisors have participated. Department heads essentially have participated just to provide their insight throughout this planning process, just to see if anything that the University of Minnesota puts forth doesn't really, you know, fit on a local level. So yeah, going forward.
So the committee will review those drafts coming out of University of Minnesota and make sure that they apply in the local.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Then one of the questions I had is, I'm kind of familiar with that a little bit because your predecessor would always reach out to townships whenever there was storm or something to see if we eclipse those numbers or not, trying to get above that so there would be some money available. But the overall emergency management plan for the county, I think we've seen that once
Okay.
since we've been
Yeah.
on the board. So that's 4 years now. Is that part of this cycle too, the whole emergency management plan for the county?
Yes, that
Getting
would be
reviewed?
considered the emergency operations plan, the EOP for the county. That essentially provide, it's more of a framework plan that kind of defaults into, you know, an ICS structure.
Yeah.
So the framework of the emergency response as a county hasn't necessarily changed very much over the last 4 years. It's a lot of changing, you know, names and people that are still, or people that have left the county and so forth. But the overall plan itself, as a whole, hasn't really changed or morphed in any way besides kind of sticking with the incident command structure, if
'Cause
that makes sense.
That's one of my concerns is being on the committee and the fact that I haven't met in 3 years, 4 years. If something happens, I have no idea outside of the little bit of training we took with some online modules, that's a lot of information for commissioners to absorb in a short period of time.
Yep.
So personally, as part of the committee, I would like to see us meet at least once or twice a year.
Okay?
Just to have a discussion and review anything. It might be a real short meeting all the time, but if something happens, I think most of us up here are clueless about how it's gonna go down or how we're gonna react to it. And just having a base level knowledge of who's responsible for what on the onset of these things and what our role would be kind of helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think having, you know, even if, whether it be quarterly or biannually, whatever it is, just to have a working knowledge of when we would, you know,
Yeah.
go into the emergency operations center, when everybody would need to get brought together to, you know, distribute, you know, information out to county members or to you know, the county population and so forth. I think that's a good idea.
Because you watch the news and you see what's in the news cycle all the time, and obviously we all have a pretty good idea what the role of the sheriff's department is in that role. But what would be the role then of the county board chair, or who's gonna be the spokesman? What's Jeff's role in all of this? Because we're gonna get inundated if something ever like that, God forbid, happens here with questions from the public.
Right.
And then, so how's all that go down and how's that information get conveyed? Just having a base knowledge of that would be
Okay.
really helpful.
Yeah, I think after this meeting, if it's okay, I can forward out those particular sections of the emergency operations plan just so that it can be reviewed right away.
Yeah.
Kind of talks about how the county board will assemble and essentially create, that command structure in line with, the sheriffs, the fire chiefs, the city mayors and so forth, to kind of provide direction to the different county departments that are handling a particular emergency. So I think, while the specifics of it, maybe not as fresh in everybody's mind, I think from my perspective, emergency services as a whole, whether it be EMS, fire, sheriff's office, police, it's kind of what they do on a daily basis, so it's almost natural
Clear to you
instinct in a way.
guys.
So they just go out and start handling something, but as the incidents get larger and the scale increases, there does need to be, more control, more direction, from a governance perspective. So I agree with you 100% that, reviewing those plans more often is needed, so.
That plan from 4 years ago, I can remember reading it, that had some things about pandemic. And now since we've had COVID, has that influenced the language or anything?
It's tough to say. I think that was a unique response. It was more of a public health and a health response, whereas your traditional emergency services, fire and sheriffs were kind of not involved with that as much. I'd have to look through those sections to see. I don't believe I've changed anything within those sections at this point, but it probably needs to be readdressed.
And in June, I believe it was, of 2020, there was going to be a statewide test for a drill or whatever, simulating an anthrax emergency. And of course, then the pandemic hit, so that was not done. So I think the pandemic kind of would help us, now with some knowledge there. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is, and because recently you've seen these train derailments in a couple of different areas. Now, I know in the northeast corner of the county, we have railroads up there. I don't know if we have any railroad anywhere else in the county, but is anything like that addressed in the plan?
I think we have, if I remember correctly, it's either a 3 or 4 mile stretch of rail line that runs through Hubbard County. I don't believe it is, but I can't remember off the top of my head. There are.
It's been 4 years since I read the plans.
So, I'm gonna take a couple notes actually, just to make sure I can cover this. So, we have rail incidents.
Yeah, and I know we have a substation up there for the sheriff's department, so.
Okay.
And Scott, I'd be happy to sit down with you and Nick and kind of look forward, thinking about structuring some communication with the board, so he gets that on his schedule, works that into the schedule as he's working the plan.
All right, sounds good.
And as you update the plan, I would encourage you to use positions. And if you want to include a name, that's okay, but in the last plan, there were names, but not always positions.
And as you pointed out, some of those people don't work here anymore.
No, they don't work, and even if, I might know someone that used to work here, but Tom might not. So that's why I would like the position named.
Okay.
And just, because when you look at the incident command structure and stuff, it's, like I say, it's kind of foreign to us. So that's why, having at least once a year where the committee meets, probably in the spring would be best. So if there's any questions, I can ask them at least and bring it back to the board at very minimum.
And also, is there, since Enbridge has changed their line through Hubbard County, is there anything addressed in there? Talks about sabotage or anything like that?
Yes, there is a section regarding natural gas and then crude oil
Okay.
response.
Okay.
And then there actually is an office of, it's within the Department of Public Safety related specifically to that type of response. So I believe that is how our response is kind of structured, with the assistance of that particular state agency.
Okay.
And you had talked about the limits for a state or a federal response. Those limits don't automatically trigger until somebody declares an emergency relative to an incident or a natural disaster or something at that point. So if the blowdown that we had last year, or the storms that we had last year that caused that created a state declaration that said these counties are under a
Right, that-
emergency order
Correct.
relative to this incident for these items. Locally, you and I had a conversation and we talked about whether we were gonna have losses that were gonna meet that. The board's first authority would be to sign on and include Hubbard County as participating in that disaster. And then if we meet the guidelines, then we can participate in that. And if it's something like a natural disaster, like a storm system, the authorization of the board to do that is necessary administratively for us to take a look at what our costs have been, what our recovery efforts are relative to that, and to allow us to be able to apply for emergency relief relative to that.
So
You-
Jeff or Scott, before you go on, would that also then involve township supervisors? Would they have to get involved to declare their township was
I'm not, I don't believe so. I think if the county activates, that anybody that suffers losses that meet that level would be able to do that within that jurisdiction. Do we have to dig down to the level of townships?
We don't have to go down to the level of the township, but they are an eligible applicant. So when they bring forth their particular damages within the township, it would be under the umbrella of the county. So in the.
So, question then, so would they bring that then to the county, or would they bring, who would they bring that to? You?
They bring that to emergency management.
Okay,
So, speaking on the blowdown from last year, I think it was last May, kind of preemptively brought a local disaster declaration to the board, which was adopted. And then going from there, I was out doing preliminary damage assessments. And then I had a person from state HSEM that came in to kind of review the preliminary damage assessments for those categories that are on that particular worksheet. We ended up coming up short of that. I can't remember specifically last year if it was, but it was in that same ballpark of that $49,000, $50,000 range. We ended up coming up short. So from there, we were not eligible to continue working through for any public assistance.
okay, so this might sound like a really dumb question.
No, that's,
but- So in the case of, blowdowns, so then how did you find out where they were in the county?
well, I worked with the Public Highway Department. I was out myself kind of doing, a lot of photographing and things like that. Speaking with a few different township supervisors and things. The blowdown is kind of a unique situation in that a lot of times it's just out, in, out in the
Yes.
forest,
Right.
there's really not a eligible applicant that qualifies for a particular level of damage there. So the idea behind the public assistance program is a reimbursement program for, government buildings, government facilities, things of that
Roads,
nature. So
culverts, yeah.
if it doesn't fit within a particular category, the state's pretty,
It's hard to quantify the costs relative to what happened here last year. 4 years ago in Cook County, a very similar thing happened, but that impacted a lot of infrastructure. It impacted roads and culverts and clearing, and as soon as you start mobilizing equipment and operators, you start having qualifying expenses, and it's pretty easy to get to $50,000. They had qualifying event because the blowdown happened where we had infrastructure that we had to clear or repair.
And when we had blowdown, actually Chip handled that by.
Chip
putting it
handled a
on.
lot of that, and the fact that, the sales that he had, even though
Yeah.
we got lower prices for it, we weren't really credited with loss in that situation, even though we did suffer a financial loss because we weren't able to, that didn't bring as high a bid as it would have if it was standing. That doesn't necessarily qualify the same way as, okay, I've got 10 guys in trucks, and, the system allows you, the equipment and the operator cost this much per hour to operate, and you run the tables and you look at it and it calculates really nicely, and it's easy to figure out and determine what your expenses are. When you're flying a drone over, 600 acres of forest land, it's really hard to determine the impact to infrastructure because it's minimal. I just wanted Scott to know that I knew that stuff. But yeah, I think I just wanted you to get to meet the group and hear a little bit of the questions that they had, and knowing that this is gonna be handed off to Nick, I think that you and I can have some quick meetings and just kind of set the schedule and get involved and determine what is appropriate for updates for the board, confirm what the expectations of that emergency planning committee is, and get that on the schedule so that we're moving that forward. And, knowing that Scott had it handled and the emergency responders and our staff all had it handled the whole time, but we still need to communicate to the board so they know what's going on if and when something happens. The old saying, when the bad thing happens, people need to know who you're calling next, right?
Yep, exactly. All right.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you,
Yep,
Scott.
thank you.
All right, the next one was child protection.
Yeah, and I had coordinated with Joe, and I haven't, we were planning on 9 o'clock, we were gonna do this really quickly. But I don't know if he's outside or,
You know, a good example is, that July storm and that went through like Hill City area. There was one township that had several hundred of thousands of dollars in damage, basically tree removal from roads, and they didn't have the budget. So they literally had to go to the bank, borrow money so they could get the roads open. And
Did
then
they
wait.
meet the criteria
Oh,
so they
yeah,
could be
yeah. And then-
reimbursed?
But
Yeah,
you know, that takes a while.
yes.
I'm not sure what happened on our schedule and coordination. We had this laid out 2 weeks ago, and he submitted this stuff for us to have, but he's not here right now. So I think we'll just have to move forward with the update on the capital improvement plan.
All right.
And so the plan, I think we've seen a couple of times in development, and the goal and the timeline of this is to have a capital improvement plan in place and approved before we get into the budgeting season this year. And what we need to do relative to that is determine that it's at a point where it answers enough questions and provides enough details that we can schedule a public hearing and then move it forward. And it's not necessarily the plan and the dollars to be spent, it's more the process for reviewing the 5-year plan and allocating, and actually allocating the dollars. The allocation of the dollars is done during the budgeting section. The identification of the needs is done during the capital improvement plan. And this plan is hard to read. It's as much fun to read as an emergency management plan. So I developed a PowerPoint that I think will be easier to review. So it's intended to provide the context to the annual budgeting process so that the board and staff are looking further down the road than just what do we need to do? What are we doing right now to solve the budget issue? The goals are to maintain the buildings and the infrastructure that we have without being hit by unexpected costs, to manage and encourage orderly growth or coordination with other units, provide public services in the most efficient way. And I think you'll all remember I grabbed Cass County's capital improvement plan to make this, so most of it has been adjusted, but some of it's still coming from their point of view. The plan prioritizes and evaluates each project based on these considerations. Now, this list of considerations is something that you want to make sure that is appropriate for this board, because I borrowed this from Cass County. Enhancement of public service delivery, public health and public safety, legal requirements, budget impact, leveraging of other fund sources, relationship to other projects, meaning if you can do this project and this project this year, and you don't have to pay mobilization costs, it makes sense. So sometimes you would right? Leveraging other projects. Joint use, resulting in taxpayer savings, economic development initiatives. So I think this list is relatively good, but this is pulled straight from the plan that you have, and I'll make sure you have a copy of this as well. But this would be one of the things to specifically comment on, are the goals of this project. From a policy standpoint, it calls for department heads to submit new proposed capital projects annually by March 31st. That the plan would be updated by the board annually by June 30th, so that it can be used in the operating budget planning. So that starts, June to September. One of the things that we want to create or calculate is the annual maintenance of effort needed to maintain the infrastructure of the $50 million of plant that the county owns, right? So that's one of the big things. We did that last year in a very small level with the solid waste plan, and we identified that relative to their deferred maintenance, we need about $400,000 a year to get some things done. But then we got to look at the rest of their vehicles, and we need another number, and then we look at the landfills, and we need another number, right? So that the solid waste plan right now is in the form of a bunch of Excel worksheets, and all the data's there, but there's no language to tie it all together. So I'll be working with Josh to tie that together. Projects requiring bond issuance will incorporate actual cost estimates. Right now, when we look at things down the road, we're using an engineer or consultant's estimate just based on a square footage and not off of an actual plan. So that means those numbers will be revised every year as they get closer to being an actual project. Typically, capital means in excess of $50,000. There are exceptions, I would argue. One of them would be when we're looking at the IT budget and we're looking at servers, right? Servers are kind of more of an equipment thing than a capital thing. They could qualify in either way, and that's kind of up to you how you want to see them. I think we've made a pretty good trajectory in the last 3 years of having an IT budget that's kind of rounding out the edges, right? And still accommodating for the bigger purchases. And if that's working, I think it just kind of clutters up the capital improvement plan if we put those lines in there. This middle one is really important. The plan projects are not undertaken unless and until they're approved by the Hubbard County Board. All projects are subject to county's procurement policy, board approval of contract awards, terms, bond insurance, and everything else, right? So if we put it on the 5-year plan, that does not mean it's getting done. It means we're thinking about it in relation to the maintenance of the rest of our facilities and the rest of the budgetary responsibilities that the county has. And then the next reasonable estimates of the impact are included when they're added to the plan. Monitoring the county's capital projects fund helps to minimize debt issuance. New tax capacity will be used to start and maintain this. We started this year in '23, and we set aside 1.1 in capital projects and 500 in economic development. Annually, the commissioners have to review if that continues to make sense. In the preliminary forecast, we've assumed that same levy effort for capital projects and economic development through 2028, which would be the first 5 years of this. Grant awards, other sources of funding are disclosed so we can see the true sources and uses on these and the impact on these projects. The improvement plan will include countywide capital projects except for highway and solid waste. Those would be brought along separately and be reviewed at the same time. Capital improvement plan also includes the planning and allocating of economic development projects, and Deep Lake Park is shown in this specifically. So then the nitty gritty, and these numbers are always changing. These are different than what you've seen previously, primarily because I pulled out 23, that's the year we're in, and that's why you can see a capital improvement fund balance. In 2023, we identified that we were going to collect $1.1 million that we were gonna spend up to 600,000, and that meant we were planning to carry 500 over. Well, what's already changed is we have an idea that we're gonna have to replace the boilers in this building, and we're kind of allocating and planning to do it half in '23, half in '24, and it's about $50,000 a shot. So the reason that number is lower is, I'll be coming to you later this spring with a plan to replace those boilers, and this is reflective of that. So the balance, the tax capacity that we, the levy that we intend to capture, and then we would have funds available. So this is the forecast of available funds. In '25, you can see an anticipation of applying for Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails grant in '23, those funds becoming available in '25. It shows the possibility of bonding for the jail renovations. In 2027, you see another funding source from Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. It's probably aggressive to think that we would get money every other year for that. And if it doesn't materialize, then that project gets pushed down to when those sources of funds are available. And then in 2028, we show the issuance of another bit of debt relative to the possibility, considering the bridge building between the two. The next page kind of shows why we need that. We've kind of committed to radio upgrades splitting over 3 years, so we know what those lines are. We've identified the fact that if we're gonna do something with the jail, those bubble drawings aren't gonna work. We're gonna need to spend some money on that. And see, everything in the 24 line is just a placeholder until we get to the point of talking about the specific 2024 budget, at which point in time we'll have better numbers, and then when you're approving the 2024 budget, you'd be setting aside that money, and still, when we come to you and say, we've got 3 architects that want to do this project for you, we've got one bidding at 75, one at 65, and one at 50, you have to make the determine which one we award to, right? So that, in each one of these cases, putting a number down doesn't mean we're spending that money. It means we're thinking that's,
So in 2024, you said jail planning, that's when we'll be able to get the nitty-gritty of the reason why they need this jail remodels? 'Cause
Well, I think
I know I'll get questions from constituents, and
Yep.
I'm gonna have to be able to go and
I
say, "This is
anticipate
why."
we'll have conversations about that this year. We have to have that before we put this money in 2024.
Yep.
So, yeah, we'll have that conversation this year.
Because for me to vote in 2025 for that 7 million levy or bonding, I'm going to need some good reasons.
You'd probably be voting on that in 2024,
But okay.
for the
whenever it
money to be
comes.
coming out in
Yep.
2025. So, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we will have to take a look at each one of those projects.
And, you know, the one way in 2028, that's probably beyond me, but even for that one, when we start talking about it, you know, like one of the proposals is the new courtroom. I mean, do we really need a new courtroom, you know? Discussion like that needs to take place.
There will be a lot of discussion about those things. Any one of those debt issuance requires a full public hearing and a public policy, and there's no way we're gonna put you in the situation without you understanding. And you actually have to schedule the meeting to say, let's have the public meeting to bring this forward, which means you as a board will already have decided this has enough merit to run it in front of the public. The talking point about putting these out there is just understanding that they're on there and nobody's made a decision to do it. These are primarily the recommendations that came out of the strategic planning and came out of the ICS assessment that we had. Between the strategic planning that was facilitated in 2021 and the ICS assessment in 21-22, those both rose to the top as the primary capital needs that the county had not had on their plan, because we didn't have a plan.
It's a plan based on perceived needs, but it can be quite dynamic.
It will be very dynamic, and you're absolutely right. If we don't provide a compelling reason for it, it's really, really super funny. I put one of these together back in Cook, and we were looking at about $9 or $12 million, and they didn't do it. And right now, they're putting it together again, and they're looking at 30. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's 10 years, money's 10 years more expensive. And part of it has to do with the fact that they're completely changed the scale of what they're looking at doing.
Yeah, yeah, and then when this stuff is done, it needs to be done right, because, you know, we're still paying on the jailhouse right now. You know, if that was done with a little bit more foresight or planning the first time, we probably wouldn't be looking at it right now.
Yeah, well, I would, actually, what ended up happening is the Hubbard County Jail was the last one designed with the old specs and standards, instead of being the first one designed with the new specs and standards. And that was just a matter of timing. And yeah, we have not determined what the actual scope and needs are. But we know where the pinch points are, and that's where we're getting this bubble idea to say, to relieve the pinch points and have be able to be the most compliant with. We don't want to be in the situation where Carleton County and a couple other counties were, where they came in and said, we're shutting you down. Spend $100 million or we're shutting you down. We want to be ahead of this before we get to that point. We're still getting passing grades in the operation and the function of our facility and our staff. So it's a lot cheaper to do this than Stearns County was looking at $250 million for a new Justice Center. These are really super big numbers, so we will, of course, have to provide more information. Transit garage, we have not put this number in here. This is less of a problem because we believe there's enough state funding for us to do this project if that becomes a priority, and it is a priority, because if we can move it out of the Public Works garage, then the Public Works won't be asking for money to improve their garage space. They'll have enough square footage. They may have some remodel needs. And then you can see under Deep Lake Park Development, we're showing the first two phases in 25 and 27, and then we're showing the balance of the proposed 5 phases out in future cost. When you look at these all in one page, it makes sense, but I think it's easier to discuss sources than uses. And then we take a look at the uses for economic development, and we've really only identified the amount that we talked about for 2023, but we've earmarked money going forward relative to having an impact on primarily those things in economic development that affect infrastructure, housing, and potentially childcare.
As an example, one of the things that jumps right out at me right away is obviously the same thing you saw, Tom, the 7 million in 2 years from now. You really have to look at the debt structure and find out, you know, basically what debt we're paying, what impact this would have, and how would that affect our budget and levy.
And-
that would be part of that discussion Jeff's talking about. And you may look at that, start gathering that data and go, oh, that's not possible.
And if we look at,
Or, oh, wow, maybe that is possible.
and I've got some debt breakdown in here that will show you the timing of that makes some amount of sense. So, the project descriptions from BKV, the jail remodel, improve intake and Sallyport space, 11,000 square feet to the west, 2025, 7.5, just earmark numbers, right? Use the existing vehicle Sallyport to increase and improve intake capacity and flexibility. Extend the building shell to provide new Sallyport space. Include appropriate storage for equipment and vehicles displaced from demolition of existing garage storage on the other side of the road. And then renovate the jail facilities and pods to provide greater flexibility in the jail. I'm not speaking for Joe or Corey or anybody on this. This is the conversation we had, and this is the summary that Bruce Schwartzman gave us relative to these two projects. And then the project description for the new facility between LEC and courts, approximately 10,000 square foot per floor, showing a date and a number just to have a place on the schedule. Provide additional court space. Why do we need that? At the general government meeting last week, we had a good conversation about why we might need more court space. Provide administrative offices for law enforcement center, provide office space for the attorney's office, and a safe corridor for transport from jail to courts. I think everybody's been on that tour and knows that our current transport between the two buildings is less than adequate, but that alone doesn't necessitate spending $15 million. And then the third one is, and this is again just identified from strategic planning and ICS, we don't have any other additional details on this, is reconfiguring and refreshing this space. So we don't have any additional context, and we don't have a dollar amount on that. It would be after the other two as a priority. And then the Deep Lake Park construction phase estimates, these are all in 2022 dollars, I believe, so they'd have to be adjusted as you put them out further. If you look in the materials, in the board materials, you actually have each year's phase and what's included in each one of those numbers. Here, I'm just for the sake of simplicity, showing you the 5-phase totals and the proposed project total. And again, our hope is that we get 75 or 80% of this in grant funding, and that we're matching grants to leverage those dollars from other sources to do this development. So here is, here's the debt service schedule that we have relative to the law enforcement improvements. And you can see that in '23, we got a big payment, '24, we got a big payment, '25, we got a big payment, and then it drops in '26. It correlates really well with the planning for a debt issuance in '25. Because the first year you issue debt, you pay interest only, and the second year you pay interest and principal. And there's all kinds of other ways of combining the debt, rolling the debt together. Based on the fact that this is all that the county is paying out of levy dollars, is an indicator that you might want to capture that debt service payment and use it for the next improvement that you have, as long as that improvement meets the other criteria. Now, if you look at the total county debt issuance, you can see over on the left, the LEC and courthouse bond. Here's an HRA bond, which is being paid by the HRA. Here's the nursing home renovations and the cottage improvements. So those debts are hopefully being paid by the operations of Heritage Center, but
Do you know what the HRA, the second one is for? I wasn't on the HRA board at that time.
yeah, and I'm not entirely sure what improvement that was made for, but we're down to the last 4 years of payment on that, so I'll actually have to look at the issuance. I just asked Kay for a listing of our debt service schedule and the timelines. So really, when you think about it right now, we're responsible for $1.8 million worth of debt service in '23, and we only levied for $818,000 because the rest of the debt is being paid from other sources. But these are all GO bonds, general obligation bonds, which means they're backed by the county levy and taxing authority, right? So looking at this schedule, it looks like a pretty clean picture. Looking at this schedule, we've got some other information to provide specifically related to the debt carried on Heritage Center operations. This one that's out to 2039 is $10 million, and this one is less. I don't know what the current rate is on that, but. So we have to have all that stuff in course. You end up looking at your current operating budget, your levy forecast, your expenditure and revenue forecast, and then you look at your debt service, and then you look at your capital needs, and you try to tie all those in together so that we don't come up with a need for $1 million debt service payment and we have to just add $1 million to the levy to do it. Our goal is to take this existing debt payment schedule, leverage that, leverage a portion of what we're capturing from Enbridge, so that when we have to do the next project, we don't have to raise the levy to pay for it. That was the goal of capturing the Enbridge, and our current retirement debt schedule means we probably have the capacity, we would have the capacity to take those two projects on without increasing the levy. We would not decrease the levy. When we pay one off, we would start paying on the other one, right? But we wouldn't have to add to do that. So Hubbard County's in a very good position financially. We need an answer about these last two issuances to make sure that we've got money coming in for those.
Do you know what our rating is right now? Because I know Heritage, we were rated a little lower just because of Heritage.
It's still a good rating. We're still in, Kay just gave it to me, but it's
Is it
A-,
AA plus? but it's-
AA plus or AA minus, and then plus minus doesn't really matter, it's just double A is good.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we're one or two from the very top.
Yep. I would go back to here, where I put a debt issuance, we might have a $13.5 million project, but I put a debt issuance of 10 million. Issuing debt more than 10 million at a time is much more complicated and much more expensive. So if you can buy it in chunks of 10 million at a time, it's costs less, and you can see that the capital improvement fund balance gets to the point where we have additional funds, so at the end, at 2028, we would have $16 million with that $10 million debt issuance to cover the cost of that project. So that's how you balance having a capital improvement fund that's growing to the point where you can, we're not gonna borrow 13.5 million, we're gonna borrow 10 million and pay 13, or 3.5 cash, right? It just manages the cost of doing those things. And again, presumptive, this is just showing how it could work. It's not saying any of those projects, we have not shown you what they need, why they're important, and what they're gonna, how they're gonna help us deliver cost-effective services. But that was kind of, I just wanted to take some time and break those slides out from, because that capital improvement plan is like reading a zoning ordinance or reading an emergency management plan. You get to a certain point, then you're always backing up and looking at the other page and rereading that thing. There's a couple of pieces that will be important for the board to think about. And they would be the first pieces in the policy and the pieces in the project, the criteria evaluation. What are the elements that you want to use? So I would suggest that if you have questions about that or want to have more discussion about that, that would be the discussion we would have. Bringing the CIP forward is just good planning. Bringing capital improvement plan forward is just good planning. It's not saying yes to any one thing. It's saying these are the conditions under which we would say yes. These are the conditions we use to evaluate these projects. And these are how we want to look at the finances of those related to the other work that we're responsible for. In the end, if you approve a capital improvement plan this year, it'll have a 5-year project schedule. And you may look at that and say, well, this one in 2028, we're not ready to have that on the 5-year plan. And that one that we're showing in 2025, that's kind of a rush. We could, you see what I'm saying? You have the responsibility to adjust that schedule to what you think makes sense. And I have the responsibility to give you enough information to do that in an informed way.
And we would do that basically annually.
Yes, just the same way when Jed comes to you with his 5-year plan, you would be adjusting the schedule. You would not have to reapprove the capital improvement plan policy annually. You would just approve the 5-year schedule annually before we start budgeting for the next year. Does that make sense where we're at with process?
Yeah, in a sense, we're not okaying spending the money.
You're not okaying spending the money. You are creating a framework to review and identify future capital needs. And then every year during the budgeting process, you would be authorizing spending money. And then you still, during the course of that year, you have to officially approve the spending of the money, right? So a lot of big numbers. The plan, I think, is about 85–90% built out now. The tables that I don't have in here are the capital improvement plan, or not the capital improvement plan, the highway plan and the solid waste plan are not appended to here, but you've seen them, and I will have them available before we bring it to the public. There's a couple of other descriptions and pictures relative to the proposed jail and addition projects. And then here's the listing of the capital assets that we have. Total without Heritage Living Center facilities is 44. And then we've got a lot of reports from that ICS report that we got the last a year and a half ago. that we have not reviewed, but generally our deferred maintenance by building is manageable, which is good. And yet at the same point in time, the mechanical system, the boilers in this building didn't make that list because while they're past the life expectancy, they're not lasting as long as we thought they were going to. Right? You may say that the life expectancy of that mechanical piece is 7 to 9 years, but really you would hope to get 15 out of it, so it's not on this list. Well, we're past 9, and it looks like we're gonna have to replace them before our next heating season, so. And then the 5-year plan would be here, or the highway plan, the solid waste plan, and then the Deep Lake Park phases are here in specific straight from the submitted and approved master plan. So I think that this is really, I think it's getting to the point where it's about 90% there, what you were asking for. Now we have to backfill in the piece related to the specific projects and talk about the prioritization and the schedule. But the first goal is to look at the policy and set a date and approve the policy and the first 5-year project plan. You were gonna ask a question.
Well, I was just thinking as I was looking at the MCIT improvement plan. So what we have for debt services, for instance, for the Heritage Campus, doesn't take into account anything that's gonna need to be upgraded.
Yes, we don't have we do not include Heritage in the capital improvement plan at this point. No. If I were to generally come up with a number, and I think we've asked this question in planning before, but if we've got $60 million in plant operations, and you wanted to think about a depreciation schedule, would you put aside 5% a year, 10% a year? Not none. So we made a big step last year in putting some aside, but $1 million against $60 million doesn't go very far.
Right.
It's a step in the right direction. It's a step that a lot of people are not in the position to make, and it's good. But this is why we need a combination of, if you were to fully fund your depreciation schedule, you'd be putting 10% aside and you'd have cash to pay for the improvements. We're not in a position to do that. So there's always the argument relative to municipal accounting and financing is who pays for the improvement? You know, as the road is deteriorating, are you collecting taxes from people until you have enough money to pay for it? Or do you make the improvement and then charge people for the use of the better facility for the next 20 or 30 years? A combination of having a capital fund and using bonding gives you a little bit of both, right? You're carrying some money forward, and then you're assessing that cost to the people who are using it down the road. And there's really no way to avoid having to borrow for some of the improvements going forward. But bonding for those improvements when it's a $10 million improvement instead of a $40 million improvement makes a lot of sense. That's the case we have to make for you before we consider the 5-year plan. You'll have to see all the reasons, go through the tours, take a look at it, see the drawings. I'm at the point now with Schwartzman just simply to say, and we have to authorize the funds, do the development work so we actually understand this, so that we can see why this is necessary. Okay, and then the next phase is now we're gonna do the architectural work to determine what the actual cost will be. There's always 2 steps in the planning.
I like a capital improvement plan too, because I think it helps the levy not all of a sudden have to spike one year to pay for a project and stuff like that.
I was joking with another administrator, I won't name her because we're on camera, but she said we're having a 3% levy increase and a 7% levy increase for our new debt. And I said, that's 10% no matter which way you cut it. And it's 7% to take on that new debt. If we were in that same situation today and had to put out a $12 million project, we would not have to raise our levy to account for the debt, as long as we did it in 2025. Which, even if you said go today, I couldn't spend that money until 2025.
Wasn't there something else we were looking at, talking about doing over there at
The old courthouse?
the old courthouse? Besides the roof, I see there's nothing on here, but what,
Heating, I think.
was that heating?
Well, there's the possibility, you know, I mean, we haven't asked the question since I've been here. I've alluded to the question, I've heard other people ask the question, is the current use of that building
Yeah, I know,
the
we
first
talked about
best use
that.
of that building?
Yeah.
Right? And we determined that right now with our current, last year you signed a 5-year continuation of the agreement with the Historical Society because we're not in a situation to be able to, we need it occupied, it needs to be used. If it was just sitting completely, totally vacant all year long, it would deteriorate faster. If we had a facility over here, do we have the ability to tie into it from the back end to alleviate the accessibility issues that we have on the front side of that building? Is there another better use for portions of that building? We would have to evaluate that, I would think, in conjunction with this project. Is there a possibility? I don't know. It'd be worth asking an architect all those questions. Do we need to build 30,000 square feet? Or can we use some of this? And the answer is gonna be, this stuff is gonna be a lot more expensive per square foot to configure than this would be to build. That doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. It's definitely worth asking the questions.
Then we would also have to aid in finding a place for the Historical Society
Yes.
to go.
Yeah, there's, every time you push one thing, you're affecting 3 others, so. Those are the unnamed questions relative to the first best use of this facility and how it ties in with the rest of the campus.
Well, and historic building is a good place for historic artifacts.
Yeah.
In my mind, yeah.
That's just that, it's not gonna disappear, so
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're
it's,
gonna use it for something.
Yeah.
So what is that best
Yeah, we're
use?
not tearing it down.
and, you know, right now, for the next, we're gonna get that roof put on. That roof was gonna be 80% funded by grant funds, so that's good. I signed the contract on that last week, so I believe they're gonna start in June. I'd have to verify the construction schedule. But I think they're supposed to be done by October 1st. So that will be done this year, then that building is as safe and taken care of as it can be for the next few years. But when you're looking at $60 million worth of assets, it's always something. And that number is last year's number, so that's probably already low. But that's what I propose the path forward is. I'm guessing that you want to see a little bit more relative to the 2 construction projects that BKV put in here. And what I would propose to do then would be to bring Corey and Joe over here and talk about that, and have Bruce come in and just talk through what specifically is deficient in our current operations, and what this improvement would do to improve the flexibility of our operations and the cost effectiveness of our operations. I think you'd want to see that before you had a vote that included a 5-year plan that showed that number on there.
And as far as at the jail, if it's possible to actually see the improvements they want to make, so in other words, a tour would be nice if they can.
Oh, yeah, yep. Yep, they'll give tours anytime.
Okay.
I got one with Corey and Joe and Bruce last year before we even asked Bruce to do these numbers for us.
Because I still can't picture in my mind how they, you know, just the intake room that they want and all that, you know, because I'm not in law enforcement or
Yep.
jailing, I can't picture that right now in my head.
I will tell you, for me, it was very compelling going over and seeing that. When
Okay.
you see, the sally ports are where they drive the cars in,
Okay,
and then there's no security from one to the other, they're all open, right?
Okay.
And then they all come into an intake room, and there's 4 or 5 holding cells. Well, at a point last year, we had more than 4 or 5 people in intake that hadn't been processed yet, so we're out of space. 4 or 5 holding cells for 80 beds is not enough. Just at that very, very base level, and that's why I say this was the last jail that was designed with the old standards, as opposed to being the first one designed with the new ones. And nipping it now would be better than having to wait and do the whole thing, redo the whole thing later. So we will do that. I think then the next step is to take feedback that you have relative to the proposed policy, and I'll try to get Bruce and law enforcement on the schedule to talk about those 2 projects. Then I would, I was gonna say sometime in, this is April, isn't it? So by probably the first meeting in May, I would ask you to set a date for the public hearing so we can review the policy and the plan. And that means I probably gotta get Bruce here in May too. We'd set the public hearing in June and then have it approved before the end of June.
All right. Any other questions? So you think if we get Joe Johnson back another time for
I will
parenting?
contact him and ask him what the kerfluffle was and make sure we get him on next time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, being on the North Country Community Health Board and Healthy Hubbard County 2030, Joe is well-known in those
Mhm.
two committees and does great work, so it'd be nice. I was looking forward to him being here today, but
We will contact him right after the meeting and make sure we get him on the calendar.
hope it's nothing serious. Hope it was just
Yeah.
a mistake.
I can see that happening. See, I'm thinking right now that we can go ahead and do this capital improvement stuff in May, forgetting that May is only 3 weeks away. But if we want it done by the end of June, we have to do it in May, which means, and I know Bruce is willing to come and Joe and Corey are willing to make this a priority, so if we can't do it at a work session, we'll do it at the end of a regular meeting, so that we can get our business done first.
Okay, anything else? Then we can adjourn. If-
You want a motion?
Yeah, motion?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Have a second? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.